You have bias. How do I know you have bias? Because you're human. Today I want to talk about bias. There's a reason humans have bias. Bias is not always bad. If you didn't have bias, which is basically a filter, your bias is a filter, you couldn't filter things out. We couldn't function if we couldn't filter things out. So, for example, if you can imagine you're walking in the woods and the leaves are crunching beneath your feet. That's okay. We've had leaves crunching beneath our feet before. We can tune that out. And that's a bias against that. You step on a stick and it cracks, it snaps. You've heard that before, it's okay. You filter that out. You suddenly see a movement in the woods. You turn and you look because this could be danger. That thing that just moved in the woods could be life-threatening and you may have to deal with it. If you remember too, when you first learned to drive, you're behind the wheel and everything mattered. Everything bothered you. The hood of the car, even feeling like I want to feel like I'm in the middle of the lane, but I'm on the left side of the car, so I have to adjust to be in the middle. Things going by, stop signs, trees, everything. Everything around you, the feel of the steering wheel, just the feeling of being on the other side of the car or in the front seat all of a sudden, and all the lights, everything affected you. So you developed essentially bias. What you did was you developed the ability to discern what's really important to you. And you filtered a lot of things out. Now you probably don't even notice the hood of the car when you drive. You're not looking down at the hood, you're looking up, you're looking around. A stop sign goes by, you stop for it, but don't pay much attention to it other than that. Things are going on around you and you are not focused on those things because your bias has taught you those things don't matter. This is how bias or filters develop in people. What happens though is we stop identifying our own filters. We stop realizing that we have these biases. And what recent studies have discovered is we all have these biases and we're all very, very good, pretty good at spotting biases in other people. We can see their biases. Where we have trouble is seeing our own bias, and this is called our bias blind spot. Your bias can be developed based on where you live, based on your gender, based on the color of your skin, based on all kinds of things. Your nationality, the language you speak, the holidays you celebrate, what your family was like, the makeup of the family, the personalities of the family, everything about you growing up creates bias in you. So let's look at that for a minute. Let's take some examples of that. Maybe we design a way to open a door and we say, okay, we're gonna have the instructions above. This is how you open the door. You grip this with your left hand and you turn this with your right hand, and that will open the door. I would then say to you, what biases did you have when you created this system? And some of them you'll be able to recognize. You'll say, well, I wrote the instructions in English, so I have assumed that the person can read and they can read English. I've also put this high. I put it about 4 feet high because I want to assume that this person is an adult. I want an adult opening this door. And those are my biases. Well, there are some other biases that you may not have realized. Your instructions said to turn it clockwise. You maybe now have a bias toward age. I know what clockwise is. I grew up with clocks. Some people may or may not know what clockwise is. You may have to design clockwise or give more of an indication about clockwise. There's some other biases that you've created. You've said that you think it's an adult because this is 4 feet high. Well, you've assumed that that person can stand. It goes further. So not only have you assumed that they can grip and that they have the strength to do this, you've assumed that they have 2 hands. You've also assumed with your sign and this whole system that they can see. These are all assumptions. They are biases on your part. The real importance here is to try to look at your blind spots and look at your biases and understand them. And it's not that you won't ever have any, but the more that you understand about them, the more that you can do, that you can design this with intention. So you may say, listen, what I'm doing is I am designing the way to open a door that will allow us to escape an airplane. So I am going to assume that the person sitting in that seat, not only assume, but require that the person sitting in that seat is able-bodied, can stand, can hear, can read, can speak to give other people instructions, have arms and legs and hands, and have the strength to open this door. But if what you are doing is you are creating a system to open the door to the butterfly exhibit at your local museum, maybe now we want to check our assumptions and come up with some other ways to open that door. So we bring our bias with us wherever we go. We're becoming more and more aware of this, but here are some examples of bringing our bias with us. One example is on archaeological digs. Back in the early 1900s, the late 1800s, when we started exploring the world, and when I say we, I'm talking about mostly white male Englishmen or white male European men were looking at archaeological digs. And they got there and they said, it is exactly as we expected. You know, we all know that men are hunters and women are gatherers. And look, it's right here before us. All the men are buried with weapons and all the women are buried with pots and pans. Except they're not. It turns out that we brought our bias to the dig and we found what we expected to find. The reality is, now that we have DNA testing, not all the people buried with weapons are male. And not all the people buried with pots and pans are female. That was our bias that we used to carry on the story we believed to be true. So bias doesn't have anything to do with necessarily with whether you're involved in the group you're biased against. So, for example, women are as likely to be biased against women as men are in certain situations. This isn't as obvious now as it was, say, in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, but, you know, there was a time when people would look at a female doctor or a female pilot and go, wait a minute, is this okay? Because in your mind, when you pictured a pilot or a doctor, you pictured a man. It's just what we had seen. It was the example. It's all that we had seen. So it took a conscious mind to say, okay, I'm going to release my bias. This is fine. And today, when we see a female pilot or a female doctor, we don't really think anything of it. But that was a conscious effort to release our biases. And more subtly, we continue to do that today. Now, what's interesting is that the studies have shown that a woman was every bit as likely to have a bias toward that female pilot or female doctor than a male was. It wasn't, that bias wasn't relegated only to men. So on occasion, you will be made aware of your bias, even when you're not necessarily trying to. And this is one of the reasons that I think travel is good for the soul. It's really good to be the foreigner, to be the oddity, or to be in an environment that immerses you in other people's biases and where you look at everything differently and new because it's just not what you expect. Well, this happened to me once in the Middle East. So I am in the Middle East and I'm in a hotel and I really, really need to pee. Now, you know how people get cutesy with restroom signs? So instead of just saying men and women, they'll have, I don't know, Corvettes and Hummers or Sheilas and Joeys or whatever. They're getting cutesy with things. Well, I was in the Middle East and they were getting cutesy with the restroom signs. So what I was looking at, standing there as I desperately needed to pee, was two figures that looked exactly the same, except one was white and one was black. That's the only difference. So I need to determine whether my restroom is the white figure or is it represented by the black figure. My American mind said, I must be the white figure, right? Because white is bride and black is groom. So I must be the white. But I don't want to get this wrong. And I'm in the Middle East. Is this the way they think? I have no idea. I just really need to pee. And then a voice whispers in my left ear, "You're the black." And I said, "Thank you." Oh, that makes sense. I get it. I'm the black, because in the traditional Middle Eastern garb, the women are all dressed in black and the men are all dressed in white. I'm gonna go to the right. So that was my bias, and it was a clear representation that I did not have the same bias as the other people around me. So I can give you some examples of my discovering my own biases, even in creating my jewelry line. So as you know, every piece that I design is created to be worn by a man or a woman. And so I would try the jewelry on men and women. I would try it on everybody. And there were a couple of things that caused me to go back to the drawing board. So, for example, a lobster clasp, the way that a lot of necklaces are fastened. Men had no experience with it. I mean, you can give me a tiny little bitty, lobster clasp, and because I've been dealing with it since I was 5 years old, I can figure it out. I don't like it. It's difficult. I'm not happy with it, but I can deal with it. So I designed a clasp that is not only easier for me to use, but it's a lot easier for most men to use that I have tested it on, because it is more similar to things that they have normally done in their lives. It's more like, almost like a fish hook, and it works a lot easier. I also had a bias or an assumption that everybody knew how to put on a bangle. Now, to put on and take off a bangle, you relax your hand. You relax it so that the bangle can slip over it. Well, men oftentimes in this day and age have not worn bangles very often. So what did they do? They clamp their hand. They try to make it small and they would clamp it tight. Well, I can't get this on my hand if it's stiff. So men just are not, in general, in this day and age, in this country, so there's a lot of biases here, are not used to this whole concept of just relaxing and collapsing your hand to put that on. So what have I done? I am creating a line of hinged bangles. Hinged bangles will work much better for my market than what I think of as the traditional bangle. So the trick here is to understand that no one can get rid of their biases. You cannot get rid of your biases entirely. You do have them. The key is to identify them when you can, to shift your thinking, or when you see something that doesn't fit with your bias, instead of immediately dismissing it, like I could have said, men will figure out how to wear bangles. Instead of just dismissing it, think about it and say, do I want to shift my bias here? Do I want to shift my thinking? Do I want to design this differently, or create this differently, or live my life differently, or allow others freedom that I haven't allowed them? This is the way to approach it. Just know you'll never get rid of it. You'll never get rid of your biases. There will be certain biases that you will never be aware of. But we can all try to be aware and try to shift our thinking so that we can see them. And by doing that, together, we can design a better world.